Well, hey everybody, welcome to Celebration Bar Review. In today's message, I want to talk about your brain. And when we think of the brain, most of us tend to think of this piece up here in the front that we think of as the prefrontal cortex. But I'm going to be talking about your whole mind, your whole brain, and really focusing a little bit on the back of the head, sort of the preconscious or subconscious mind. Now, the relevance of this for the bar exam is that when I talk to bar students, typically what they're saying to me is something like, I'm really struggling with how to get all of this information into my head and retain it for the purposes of the exam. And they really focus on memorization, unfortunately. We don't believe that that's the right approach. Because memorization essentially is limited to the capacity of our prefrontal cortex. And most of the current research says that most of us can hold 6 or 7 ideas consciously in our brain at one time. That's really not a lot, and that's why mnemonic devices become so popular, because they're a link of one of those 7 things that links to maybe 10 or 12 others, or you create an attack outline for writing, same idea. But essentially, you're still looking at a finite capacity, and most people that have studied that way would tell you that it's frustrating, it's time-consuming, and ultimately, it's fruitless for a significant number of people. And I was trying to figure out how to explain the difference between using that part of your mind and using your whole brain, the way that we would teach and the way that we use, for example, with our photo reading, which is a product developed by Learning Strategies out of Minneapolis about, I think, almost 20 years ago now. And photo reading is a technique in which you literally flip the pages on the material that you're looking at very quickly. The material goes to your subconscious brain, and then you activate that material through what we would describe as neurolinguistic programming. I mean, some techniques that help get at what's in your whole mind so that you've got access to the material, but it's not in your conscious brain, not where you'd expect it to be. As I was trying to explain that to a student the other day, I thought of this particular analogy, and I wanted to share it with you because I think it's a good one. Assume for a minute that you are a struggling lawyer or law student, and by struggling, I mean you've been struggling to pay your bills. I mean, you're looking at the bank balance every day. It's really low. It's tight. You're worried about overdrafts and all of those kinds of problems, and you're really struggling every day to figure out just how am I going to eke out enough to keep that balance above zero today. And you're working at it and working at it. And you're looking at your mint.com account and you're online. And you're doing all the things that you can do to figure out how to keep yourself from not overspending what little you've got in that account. And it just never seems to be enough. Well, imagine your surprise when you get, I used to say a knock on the door, but I guess more appropriately today would be you get a Skype message or an email or a text message from your banker. And they contact you and they say, hey, Mr. or Ms. Customer, we're a little confused by something. We've been watching all of this activity that you've been engaged in transferring funds around and doing things and trying to keep your bank balance just above zero. And we're a little confused about that because we see what your checking account balance is. But we have a question for you. Why aren't you using the $1 million? Excuse me? The $1 million? There must be a mistake. No, there's no mistake at all. You have another account with $1 million in it, which you haven't touched. I mean, you rarely touch it at all. In fact, it's been years since you've even put anything into that account. Wait, I don't have $1 million account. Of course I don't have $1 million account. Oh no, you do. We've got the records. They're right here. You just haven't touched them. Well, what's this $1 million account? Well, for our purposes, the $1 million account is your subconscious. It's your preconscious brain. It's got a wealth, literally, of information and material. Your preconscious brain holds everything that you've learned. It's got everything you learned all the way through life, including law school and the practice of law, and maybe even the prior times you took the bar exam, if that's relevant for you. And all of that is there. The problem is you're not accessing any of it. So to go back to our example, you think for a minute about this banker's contact and you say, well, that can't possibly be because I don't remember putting $1 million into a bank account. And the banker says, well, it wasn't all at one time and it wasn't a big event. It was just a little bit every single day that got dropped into this account. And you continue, in fact, to be making deposits to the account, and it's earning interest. In fact, it's now worth, more than $1 million because of that. How could that be? Well, how do I get access to it? I mean, that would be the logical question. If it's really mine, how do I get access to this $1 million? And the banker says, well, it's really very simple. You just transfer the money into your regular account and use it. Oh my gosh. How many of you wouldn't do that if that was a real scenario? I mean, I think all of us at that point would say, yeah, give me some of that. That would be great. Well, the same thing is true with our brains. We can use what's in our preconscious and subconscious brain. If you're a reader of sort of the popular science kinds of literature out there, one of the most prolific and successful writers is a man by the name of Malcolm Gladwell. He wrote a book called Blink a few years ago, in which he talked about this intuitive sense, this preconscious mind that we've got that allows us to retain information, and then we use it typically almost subconsciously or unconsciously to form decisions, make judgments, to evaluate situations that we're faced with. Well, the same is true here. When you're taking the bar exam, if you can learn to activate your preconscious or subconscious mind, now instead of having the limited capacity up here, you've got the entire massive capacity of your whole brain working on your behalf. Paul Sheely at Learning Strategies describes it this way. He says the prefrontal cortex, the conscious mind, is like a little eyedropper, a little tea drop, but our whole brain is like a huge fire hose. Now, when you think about that, that's an incredible benefit to have on the bar exam. If you could have access to all of that material, all of that information, the fire hose of information, instead of the little tiny tea drop or teardropper of our conscious brain, who wouldn't want to do that? And that's what we've experienced over the last few years, is we've integrated photo reading as an option for our students. But even if you're not using photo reading, if you're simply skimming and then activating the material through the lectures and then the practice questions as we lay out in our program of spaced repetition, you're getting the benefit, at least a part of the benefit, of that $1 million mental bank account. And here's the really cool thing. It's there whether you use it or not. It is there for every person who's watching and listening to this message. All you have to do is to begin to tap into it. So part of what we do in the bar review is to help you access your own accounts. We show you the password. To go back to our banker, if the banker said, well, you've got the $1 million, all you have to do is access it. And you say, well, how do I do that? What's the password? Well, you do need the password. You do need to know how to access your account, the account number, password, the other information. That is what we call, and I mentioned it earlier, as activation in neurolinguistic programming terms. It simply means to take the material that's already there and to be able to reach into it and grab it and use it when you need it. So in our course, we show you how to do that on a multiple choice question, on an essay, on a performance test. And it results in amazing improvements for people once they kind of get used to the idea that they've got $1 million in the bank. I mean, it changes the way they live, it changes the way they study, and it can do that for you as well. Well, I hope I've piqued your interest at least a little bit today. And even if you're not taking our course, even if you don't want to do photo reading, even if you think all of this is crazy, and I assure you that none of that is true, it is all legit and it works. But even if you're skeptical about all of that, just think back for a minute to all of the things that you've known intuitively but didn't know consciously, couldn't think of right on the spot, word for word memorized, but you knew them. That's the reality of what your conscious brain and your unconscious brain can do. And if you'll start to tap into the unconscious brain, you'll find yourself with a wealth of information, ideas, abilities that you probably didn't know that you possessed before. See, you don't have to be great at memorizing and mnemonics and forming attack outlines and having all sorts of clever devices to help you cram more information into your brain and then spit it out on the bar exam. What you really need is the opportunity to get at what's already in your account, using that to its maximum effectiveness. And when you do that, I think what you're going to discover is that you've got $1 million brain. Hey, thanks for joining me today. We'll be back to you again soon.